So not only are we getting Night Elves that swore against Fel now becoming Warlocks, but we're also getting Mega Orcs embracing Fel magic, which is essentially the only thing that separates them from regular green orcs that we've always had. And even more crazy part is that Draenei are actually becoming Warlocks, and we already have a word for those, the Man'ari, that we defeated with Sargeras. However, now the Lightforged Draenei are embracing Fel as well, which really is just a contradiction in itself. There is even a new lore where it says that they realized Fel can be used alongside the light, which is definitely not something Zera would agree with. So what are all these new class combinations in 10.1.5? How is Blizzard going to make sense of them, and could it even work without it just being completely contradicting? If you guys are looking to buy Dragonflight or anything Warcraft related, Gamibo has some amazing sales that you can check out with my link. On top of that, you can get software, gift cards, various games at crazy prices. Best of all, you can use my code DORON to add yet another discount to your purchase, so make sure to click my link below, check out Gamibo, and grab some amazing deals. As you guys may probably already know, Blizzard vowed to essentially make all the classes playable for all the available races maybe like a year ago, which is quite an undertaking, and right now we're looking at yet another batch of these new combinations, and it is a pretty big one. Some of these were easy to add, but as they said, they would have to add new lore, and they are actually doing that as we're getting new class lore in 10.1.5, which is going to be pretty soon. So if you didn't hear the news outside of the new pet stuff for Warlocks, the new class for this patch are Warlocks, and we are going to get them playable for Night Elves, Draenei, Lightforged Draenei, Pandaren, Kultirans, Tauren, High Mountain Tauren, Megar, and the Zandalari. Overall, this is excellent news, and for most of these, some are a bit weird, but I can totally see them work. For some, it may be a bit harder to introduce, and for some, I feel like it is just downright contradicting with the current lore. So let's just start looking at it in detail. In regards to Kultirans, this is the most straightforward. We have seen them wield all types of dark magic, so I really see no reason why they weren't able to be Warlocks by this point anyway. For the Pandaren, it does kinda go a bit against their peaceful nature, but it is really nothing out of the ordinary. I would say the same as for the Tauren and the High Mountain Tauren. Tauren are generally a druid, nature-loving race, but we have seen a lot of pretty dark and shady Tauren over the years, so it's really not that hard of a pill to swallow. I would say the same for the Zandalari as well. They never really dabbled in demon stuff, but they really dabbled in a lot worse stuff, as the trolls are notorious for their dark practices, so this, I would say, matches them pretty well. However, now we have some of the problematic races. First are obviously the Mega Orcs, which I feel like kind of defeats the purpose when you think about it. I mean, the entire point of Mega Orcs is that we can get orcs like what they used to look like before they started dabbling in Fel magic, which essentially turned them green, and now we are getting exactly that. I know their lore is different, they're from Alternate Draenor, but on Alternate Draenor we had a green orc, and that orc was Gul'dan, a Mega Orc Warlock. So I feel like this is going to get a bit weird, as at that point, how is that really going to separate them from regular green orcs? Are we just going to get alternate green orcs? Are they even going to become green? The only explanation I can see is that since we defeated the Burning Legion, we might have learned of a way to tame Fel magic, or to use it in a manner that doesn't corrupt like the original Horde did in the past, where it just completely corrupted them. However, the main issue for this is the established lore so far that we have, since the entire point of Fel magic is that it is terribly powerful, so like high risk, high reward type thing. You can do a lot of stuff with it, but you essentially sacrifice your soul and become demon-like. Best example of this are demon hunters that essentially turn into demons by infusing themselves with Fel. I guess you could say Warlocks don't just wield Fel, they also use the Void, which is really just as corrupting, if not worse. Remember that time when elves started using Void magics, I guess in a more reasonable and controlled manner, and we got a brand new race of Void elves that are physically just completely different. So I really don't see how Warlocks can work with the Mega and them maintaining their purity and not just turning into regular orcs. Now, next down the line, we have the Night Elves. I mean, this one can be explained in a lot more simple manners, as, let's be real, we have seen some really dark Night Elves, really quite akin to the Tauren. However, the thing about Night Elves is that they swore against using Fel. They based their entire society against using Fel. They essentially exiled Illidan for one of those reasons. They even banished arcane users when they were really going to the extreme. I guess the only explanation is that since the defeat of Sargeras and going into all these timelines, cosmological stuff, their society society evolved and they learned that Fel magic and Warlock stuff is not the forbidden fruit they thought and that it can actually work. So overall, a bit of a weird combination, but since we had Illidan who was a Night Elf, I can totally see them pulling this off. However, now we're kinda going into problem territory, and those are the Draenei and the Lightforged Draenei Warlocks. The Draenei situation is almost exactly the same as the Night Elves, but like 10 times worse. The Legion did some really bad things to the Draenei, like more so than anyone else. In fact, two of their main commanders, Archimonde and Kil'jaeden, were Eredar or Draenei. They essentially splintered their society, so naturally they swore off against Fel, devoted their entire existence against battling it. I mean, there is even a word for it, Man'ari. Those are the Eredar that accepted Fel. It essentially means unnatural beings, and they refer to them as corrupted brethren. So, don't you think it is a bit weird that after 25,000 years of battle, they just started embracing Fel all of a sudden? Once again, the only possible explanation I can see is that after all these battles and defeating the Legion, they learned that Fel is just a cosmological power that can be used in a controlled manner, as there isn't Sargeras using it maliciously, but honestly, in my opinion, nothing in the lore so far told us that it can be used in a controlled manner without corrupting the actual user. The other possible scenario is that I could see these Man'ari Eredar that used to be a part of Legion attempting to join the Draenei and reconnect, sort of similar to the Highborn rejoining the Night Elves a few years back. I could see that work, even Velen's son was a part of this, so after so much destruction, we could see this reconnecting process. The Draenei are one of the oldest, most intelligent, wisest races, so I could definitely see them being able to accept their brethren back, since the Legion is now gone. However, now we have a bit of an impossible scenario in my opinion, and this includes the new lore that is being added in 10.1.5, and those are the Lightforged Warlocks, which really is a contradiction in itself. So, to quickly explain it, all these guys are essentially Eredar, one race. They essentially split into the Man'ari and the Draenei. The Man'ari joined the Legion, the Draenei escaped from Argus. However, the Draenei split into the Lightforged and the regular Draenei. All of the Draenei are super connected to the light, to the Naru. However, the Lightforged, as you would guess, are like 10 times that. They followed the Army of the Light directly, joined it, they were quite literally infused with the light itself. In fact, the entire light forging process was shown to us. It essentially clears a user of everything, purifies them, turns them into a weapon against Fel that we have seen them used as. So, them now embracing Fel magic and becoming warlocks is seriously just one massive contradiction. Now, I'm not going to give my opinion, speculate on this. Blizzard actually gave us a questline in the new patch that gave us official new information on how they're actually implementing this. Long story short, his explanation is that the light saved them all these 25,000 years since they escaped. However, the light was never enough. As he said, the light preserved them, but not all of them, and they constantly kept losing their numbers. So essentially, this guy realized that the light is not the all-powerful, the force that they thought, and he realized that Fel can be used not in opposition to the light, but alongside it. Now, personally, I can see how this makes sense, but I also feel like this is massively contradicting the lore that Blizzard presented to us so far. The light is really not the force to explore multiple directions and use other powers for practical purposes. The light is all about itself, the light, and being righteous. I mean, we literally saw Allyria trying to do the same thing a few years back with the Void, and she was literally imprisoned. The light also sort of brainwashes, as it attempted to do the same thing to Illidan, and he opposed it. So it is really weird that suddenly the army, the fanatical army of the light, is like, well, I guess we can start wielding Fel now. The only explanation I could see possible is that Illidan destroyed Xerath, and that completely not only shattered her, but the way the Army of the Light works. Maybe they started becoming a lot less dogmatic, they realized that Fel can be utilized for good, as after all, it was really Illidan who did most of the work in a really short amount of time, and not Xerath all these thousands of years, and all this was done with the help of the Fel to defeat Fel. So this way, the explanation makes sense, and also I think this is a pretty big narrative change as well. I think Blizzard may be distancing themselves now a bit from the light is just this crazy fanatical narrative, and instead making them more balanced, which could make that big speculation of the light invading us a lot less likely than we had previously believed. This could also be a soft setup for the Undead Paladins happening soon, so overall I guess we have to wait and see how this is going to turn out, but right now it really isn't 100% clear. Thank you for watching. Check out how Dragon Island will become available for all Dragon mounts by clicking on the screen, and check out Dragon's Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time!